Okay, so my name is Syed. I'm the CISO for Metallic. Metallic is a SaaS product by Commvault, they've been around for 20 plus years in the data protection industry.
Yeah, my name is Karunakar Bojjireddy. I am the director for Metallic Security and Governance. I run the SecOps for our SaaS business in Commvault.
So today we're going to talk about scaling SaaS platform. How many of you guys actually have a SaaS-based product that you're selling to your customers or maybe even using? What is that product? VMware. Yeah, of course. Okay, and somebody else? Oh, maybe I saw another person. Okay, so that's basically giving you guys. And now, even though you don't have SaaS products, how many of you guys have workloads in the cloud? Critical workloads in the cloud? Or non-critical? Okay, so a majority. Okay, so things that we're going to talk about here apply absolutely to workloads in the cloud as well. Okay? So SaaS apps are really transforming how businesses are occurring today, right? Anything from customer management to support management to data protection to even security. You'll hear about a lot of that stuff, security tools and services, infrastructure management, blah, 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 right? You're probably using a SaaS service today and you don't even know that it is a SaaS service, right? If you use O365, that's a SaaS service, right? As an example, right? You use Teams, you use Skype, you use Slack, blah, 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 whatever. All those are SaaS services, right? And so it's expanding globally, exponentially, right? And with that, the threat surface is expanding globally. The attack surface is expanding globally. A lot of times what I see in the industry is, there's this ransomware attack and there's that ransomware attack. But there's also other things happening, right? I mean, look at this. 25% of security incidents are because of ransomware attacks. But what about the other bigger percentage, right? Accidental deletes, nefarious deletes, right? I think it was, I don't remember which cloud provider it was. Some employee got really upset and went out and deleted a bunch of data, customer data, and left the company. That's nefarious deletes. That's not a ransomware attack, right? That's an insider attack, but more specifically going after the data, the customer data, right? So when I have security conversations, it's not about security, it's about data protection as a whole, of which security is a pillar of, right? Data protection is what it's all about because your crown jewel is your data in today's world. Everything else is irrelevant, right? So why is SaaS so prevalent in the industry? Well, you're basically offloading, right? There was a time where you were offloading infrastructure management to the cloud providers or managed service providers. And now slowly people are getting smarter. It's like, hey, for me, I'm lazy, right? I want really quick route to market for all of my critical services, all of our critical services. I want someone else to take on the burden of managing the day-to-day operations of that widget or that service. I just want to consume it. That's all I want to do for my business use case. And that is why SaaS services have become so prevalent. Salesforce.com, of course, we may have heard those services.
Yeah.
We are a SaaS provider of our own, right?
Yeah. So, and I just want to chime in. We are also a SaaS provider, but we also consume a lot of SaaS offerings. And it's because of the convenience where you are more interested in protecting your business and how do you operate. You don't have the time and the skills to go and acquire tools, run the tools. So that's one of the main reasons, and we will look into that one on what we are doing to protect ourselves.
Yep. So now, for those who don't have a SaaS product, replace SaaS with your infrastructure in the cloud or the cloud services you are deploying, right? Or even some of the critical services you have on-prem. A lot of this stuff, this world is kind of hybrid, right? It's kind of blending together. So replace SaaS with hybrid, right? So who's responsible for the platform security, SaaS platform security, or IT security, or product security? It's everybody. Everyone. The consumer, which is really your end user or customer, the IT department, the business units, right? And your managed service provider or your cloud provider. There's a shared responsibility model, and most companies actually have that published on their website. This is the Microsoft one, right? And you can clearly see the delineation between where Microsoft stops, where an IaaS service begins, where a SaaS service begins, where a PaaS service begins, and who's responsible for that. For us, Metallic platform, we are responsible for a bulk of the security requirements and security controls. But guess what? Customers are not absolved of their need and responsibility for security. All that top section is the customer's responsibility, including, but not limited to, the data. It is the customer's data. So guess what? You, as the consumer of the product or the widget you're using, are responsible for ensuring that the data is secure.
Yeah, so like Syed said, like the bulk of the security responsibility lies with the provider, whether it's the provider like us, like Metallic. We work with the cloud provider, but there is also a responsibility from a customer perspective. At the end of the day, they are responsible for the data. They need to ensure that they do the right data protection, make sure if there is any kind of a disaster active related events that they can recover the data and use the tools provided by the SaaS provider. But at the end, who's responsible for the data is the customer is responsible. He's the one who's responsible.
So the next 27 minutes, we're going to talk about how you can implement critical security control data protection strategies and protect yourselves, protect your data, protect your crown jewels. Okay? So just a little bit about us. Who are we? Metallic, as I said, is part of Commvault. We are a SaaS-based data protection as a service platform. We are in the business of protecting customers' data as a service. Okay, that's what we do. So it was fitting for us to be here and talk to you guys about how to protect your data and take advantage of the strategies we have implemented. So we protect anywhere from M365 workloads, hybrid workloads, cloud workloads, workloads in Azure, workloads on-prem, blah blah blah. Okay, and so what do we take care of as an operations standpoint?
From an operations, right, we need to ensure we are constantly monitoring for threats. It's publicly accessible. That means your services, your underlying resources, all your assets are always attacked. So one of the things is we constantly monitor what threats are happening. How do you prevent those threats? Like whether it's our identity and access, network controls, what level of threat monitoring activities you're doing. Those are all the things from a SaaS provider we are responsible. In addition to ensuring one customer doesn't get access to someone's data, how do we have some separation at different levels, at a cryptographic data level, right?
Yep. Things like updates, infrastructure updates. And, for example, this is the scale of our service. Global, exponential growth in the past 2.5 years that we have existed. 60 plus availability zones. 2,000 plus VMs, containers, PaaS services. You think of a service that is in the cloud, we are using it to provide our SaaS service to the customer, right? So massive. The numbers on the right-hand side, we are actually double the numbers in what we're protecting, right? So you can see why security is actually really, really critical to us, okay? So updates, a 0-day patch shows up, we take care of it, the customer doesn't, as an example, okay? So that's what we're responsible for. And because we're responsible for that, we want to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to ensure that we don't have any gaps. And one of the best ways to do that is get third-party attestations, right?
Yeah. So security is important, but also compliance is important. Security is not compliance. Everybody knows about it. But both of them have to exist together, right? One of the big advantages of having any kind of compliance assessments done is they have a set of framework which they are going to assess your overall posture. How are you doing from a people? How are you doing from a process? What are the procedures? Who has access to that? So that's why it's essential to have a third-party validation of your environment. So it's very, very key. It will help you improve your overall security controls, identify where your gaps, either from a process perspective or other tools. Okay, I have this tool, this doesn't do a good job, what can I do? So we have done a lot of assessments across different things, general certifications like ISO and SOC, industry-specific compliance certification, HIPAA, PCI, and then some government controls like FedRAMP. And again, here's where it comes in, right? You need to clearly go and document your controls, who is responsible. So for example, normally if you're a SaaS business, you're running on a cloud provider, normally, right? Not necessarily, but what is the cloud provider responsible for? I can go and tell how the physical security is. So you need to have the assessment, go and talk to your cloud provider, have a clear understanding what their controls are, what they are responsible for. We need to document and give it back to the assessor. So what is your responsibility? What are the shared responsibility between you and the customer, between you and the cloud provider? So that's one of the key benefits of doing this assessment is it helps you document and it helps your team understand what the responsibilities are.
Yeah, for example, so FedRAMP is one of the most stringent security control assessments any company can go through or will go through. FedRAMP High is the highest level of security controls outside of the DoD environment that any SaaS or cloud provider can achieve, right? Really, really, really deep and broad level of assessments performed by a third party, validated by the federal government, FedRAMP PMO. So we went through that whole process and achieved FedRAMP High. And then we went ahead and did the DoD IL5, which is another set of controls on top of all the FedRAMP High controls, right? So are we serious about security? Absolutely. And the point here is not that we are really serious about it. The point is that whatever industry you're in, whether you're a healthcare provider, whether you're a fintech provider, whether a financial institution, on whatever you're and if you're doing any kind of business with the federal government or SLED or international or Eurozone, right? You need to look at that and you need to have a third party validate your controls. Because why? As security professionals, we are not egoistic. We know that we are going to get attacked. It's just a matter of when. And so we need to be covering all of our bases and ensure that someone else is also looking at our environment, because we don't, most people don't call their baby ugly, right? So have somebody else come in and tell you all your gaps. That's the key of this slide. So how can you achieve the level of controls depending on your business environment and your business requirements? So high level, right? Leadership sponsorship is key. If you do not, for any program, let alone a security program, something as critical as security and data protection, if you don't have leadership sponsorship, and I'm not talking about your director, your senior director, or your VP, I'm talking about at the CEO and the board level down. If you do not have that commitment, you will fail. You will fail to deliver on the promises you're making to the business. Because guess what? I as the CISO, or you as the CISO or the security professional, you are not responsible for making those decisions, right? The board, the CEO, those people are, the CIO, those people are responsible for making the decisions based on the information you're providing to them. However, they're still responsible for it and accountable for it. They are reporting their information to somebody else, right? So leadership sponsorship is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and on top of leadership, right, you need to have a framework. Means you need to pick a framework. There is no reason to reinvent or invent a framework. There are a number of frameworks. In our case, we went and picked NIST 853 standard. It covers a broad area, right, from physical security, hardening, threat and vulnerability management, risk management. So pick
the 3 Ps, right? Process, people, and products. NIST 800-53, which actually, by the way, is what FedRAMP aligns to as the control. Those are the 3 aspects of the controls you have to keep in mind. Sorry, go ahead.
So pick a standard. That's a key thing, right? And then start looking at what your gaps are. Come up with a plan. How are you going to address your gaps? What are your mitigation controls if you can't address a gap? So the first thing is like pick a standard or a framework. The next thing is all about empowerment and including security as part of your end-to-end process. That means you want to make sure you're doing some security testing right at the development and design phase. Okay, how do I ensure if I'm having a container-based kind of a deployment that I scan the containers at development and fix all the critical vulnerabilities before it's getting deployed into your production system. So DevSecOps is a real thing, and you need to ensure security is included as part of your CI/CD process. Okay.
Another thing, just to interject, hire the right people who know what they're doing. And you can hire the best technologists in the world, but if they don't have a strategic mind and can think beyond what they see and look 5 years ahead, you will miss a bunch of things. You know, one of the reasons we hired Karunakar 2 years ago to expand our security service was that. Yes, he's got 20 plus years of experience as a technologist, but he also has 10 plus experience as a leader of product management with the strategic mind in place. And we're very happy with the results.
Yeah, means just not hiring the right people, empower them. How
That's
do you
right.
empower them? You need to set clear objectives and goals. Okay, that's how you empower them. And you have to clearly lay out the roles and responsibilities of different people who are working together. What are they responsible for? Both of those things are key, right? Like, just make sure their roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. Set out the objectives, okay, whatever that objectives are. These are my key metrics. This is what I need to meet. So, and the last thing is, security is so vast. Try to go and, what we did, at least as a strategy, was we went and used security as a service. We didn't try to build our security. We are only consuming security services to protect our SaaS business. So those are the three decisions we did. Pick a standard, empower people by clearly laying out the roles and responsibilities. Go and use as much as possible security as a service, because it takes time to build your infrastructure, your security tooling infrastructure. Okay?
Yeah.
So those are the.
And finally, document everything. Everything. Every aspect of your service, you need to document, from what services you're using to the process you're going to use to make a change or delete something, blah, blah, blah. Everything must be documented, right? And then have an open communication. Be completely transparent. As a security professional, thou shalt be transparent, right? You should not be hiding anything, especially from executive leadership, because they're the ones accountable for making these decisions for you, right? And so, again, I go back to the theme, right? We talked about people, we talked about process, and we talked about products and services, okay?
Yeah, and again, automation and policy-based kind of configuration, right? Automation is key. If you don't have automation, there's going to be human errors. That's where people can accidentally delete. It's not always people have malicious intent, right? It's because you are tired, whatever is the reason. So automate it, test it as much, and then deploy it into a production system. So automation is one of the key things that we need to do. Okay.
So here's a high-level recommended security architecture from the perimeter all the way in.
Yeah.
You want to dig
So when you think about security, right, you start with identity and governance. Who has access? Zero trust, right? Zero trust has a lot of meanings, but like at the minimum for me, principles of least privilege. Who has access to the system? Can you go and...
Yeah, they don't trust me with anything.
Yeah, we don't trust anybody in our company. That's our... It's not a joke. That's how we operate. Okay. So who has access? At any point, can somebody come and ask my team, telling who all have access? Does this person have access? I don't want to go and tell, come back after like 1 hour or something. I want to give the answer right away. Okay. So identity and governance is pretty critical. Then the next thing is like your network security, right? Like we have like probably thousands of resources. If something gets attacked, you want to contain that attack to a particular segment. So you need to make sure you have network segmentation. Make sure your data is in a different network than where you're processing your data. So network segmentation. perimeter control. You are probably going to be attacked every day. What kind of protection you have? Application firewalls, DDoS protection, that's other thing. And the next one is about data security, right? At the end of the day, as SaaS providers, what are we trying to protect? It's all about data, nothing else. Everything is different. Like data is the key, right? And how do you make sure you have the visibility into everything? That's where threat monitoring, security monitoring comes into play. So the part which covers across everything is what kind of threat monitoring, what kind of threat management are you doing? Do you have all the threat protection tools in place, okay? And are you going and auditing all the activities? And where do you store it and make sure nobody can tamper those evidences if you need?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we stress a lot on storing customer data, protecting customer data, but the data about the data also needs to be protected. Logs, audit logs, metadata, all of those things. You have to apply the same level of security rigor to the metadata that you do with the data, okay, and everything in between.
Yeah, so it all starts with network architecture. When you're moving from enterprise to cloud, it's two different paradigms, right? You can't go and tell whatever I do on my enterprise, I'm just going to lift and shift and put it like in cloud and everything is going to work.
So really quickly, how many people have a cloud transformation strategy in place right now and in execution mode?
Yeah, this side.
Okay. And so how many people are using cloud? Okay. Well, sure. Okay. So keep going.
Yeah, so we need to have an architecture which is designed for the cloud, okay? And you need to understand what are all the constraints of the cloud, what are the advantages, what are the things you can take advantage from a cloud provider. One thing we did as a SaaS provider is we have a SaaS business and we have our corporate network. Both of them are completely separated out. So we don't want any breaches on one to affect the other. If your corporate is affected, I don't want that to propagate into my SaaS security and affect others. It's the same thing, if something happens to my SaaS business, I don't want that to go and affect my corporate network. So you need to have a decoupled architecture. Both of them are air-gapped from each other, so that there is no connectivity. But there are few things where you may want to take advantage of the corporate infrastructure. We'll come to that during identity.
Yeah. So is anyone in insurance business or financial business here? Okay.
Yeah.
So have you had? Do you know if so which business? Insurance or finance? Insurance. So have you had either your insurance company or that's offering you insurance for IT security or something come to you and say, hey, thou shalt have air-gapped storage or immutable storage kind of thing? Or do you know? Okay. So this is important because now, after all of these ransomware attacks that have been happening, so Colonial Pipeline, who knows about the Colonial Pipeline attack? Okay, right? So what happened? Somebody breached AD using social engineering, of course, and then decimated their backup infrastructure so they couldn't recover, then put a ransomware malware on there and encrypted their data. Now, they were able to recover from backup 2 weeks later, but guess what? It's Colonial Pipeline. They can't wait 2 weeks, so they had to pay the ransom, right? So all of these examples that have happened, insurance companies are like, you know what? We're done paying out on all of these things. You must have immutable storage, and you must have a third party attest to it. If whether it's backup or your critical data, your whatever, right? Or you must have an air-gapped copy of your data somewhere. So now the industry, the regulators are actually starting to mandate these requirements, right? And so we have to kind of move with those, whether you're using cloud, on-prem, public cloud, SaaS service, those regulatory requirements are going to be there. Your insurance provider are going to require you to have those kinds of strategies in place, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
When you said air-gapped,
Yep.
decoupled, is that two separate cloud providers? Is that two different regions? I mean, that's tough
Yeah.
to do.
So not necessarily two, right? But it's like two different tenants. Like let's assume if I go to the same cloud provider, your customer A and your customer B, we act as if we are two different customers, okay? But like it can be different strategies for different people. But at least in our case, we are going with one same cloud provider, but like two different tenancies.
So as an example, Karunakar talked about Commvault corporate environment is completely decoupled from our Metallic environment. To us, what that means is the security controls are completely separate. The AD structure is completely separate. The AD structure for Metallic, the SaaS platform, is not managed by Commvault IT. Is managed by Metallic SRE organization. So even the management of access and authorization and authentication is completely different. The mechanisms are different. The tools are different. The cloud provider may be the same, but completely separate tenants.
Yeah. Means we definitely share best practices and all those things,
Yeah.
but it's operated as two different tenants or companies, right? Where that's how we keep the separate.
Air gap is a very strong word.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you're 100% correct,
No,
right?
which virtual air gap we can think that way.
So air gap is another buzzword, but we'll address more here. Good question.
Yeah.
Okay, so it all starts with security monitoring, right? High level network, and then how are you going to collect all that data? So detection, protection, response, and deception, right? So let's dig deeper into that.
Yeah. So one of the key things is obviously centralized logging, monitoring is very, very important, okay? So you need to make sure you funnel all your log events to a central place. So you can have one place where you can correlate the data. If the attack vectors are coming from different places, how do I put all those things together? So a SIEM solution is necessary. And again, like I said, the theme of our whole thing is go and get as a service, security as a service. And again, at least on our side, what we did was security skills are very hard to get. I can't train people in 10 different things. So we first tried to go and tell, okay, let's try to get as many tools from one single vendor as much as possible. There is a risk involved, but like we decided to take with that risk. So we went and got a SIEM solution, and that's where we are sending all the things.
So really quickly, how would you mitigate that risk of going to a single vendor for a bunch of these tools and services? How would you try to mitigate that? So you would do the same thing that you're doing with yourself, right? You're making sure that you're analyzing your vulnerabilities and your gaps and whatever. And so goes back to process. In your procurement process, you must include a security assessment for any tool or services you are going to procure. Like we use a SIG, a SIG security assessment form. Some people use SIG Lite, right? So whatever strategy you implement, apply that strategy across the board, including your supply chain. So if you're going to go procure a tool from Microsoft or Google or whatever, you got to make sure that you are actually reviewing their security practices, making sure that they have all the right security assessments performed by a third party. I don't want to take your word for it. I want someone else to tell me that you're secure. Okay? So process is extremely important. It's the third of a three-legged tool, right?
Yeah. So you need to obviously have a centralized place where you can funnel all your events, so you can go and do analysis. You can do a lot more effective threat detection and monitoring. And then obviously you need to have different intrusion detection or any kind of network intrusion in places. Like depending on what kind of product you use, like for past products, you need to depend on your service provider to tell what kind of intrusions are happening. So integrate that into your environment. And last but not least, a end-to-end service monitoring. You need to have a SOC in place where people are looking at it and actively looking at all the events. And it's not like, okay, everything is automated, nobody is going to touch, and there is no eyes and ears looking at it, right? So we need to have a SOC also in place.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't address this, but this is a recommended high-level end-to-end data flow. because again, it's all about data security, right? From the customer or the user of the application all the way to the data at rest. So just wanted to address that. So the next step is, authentication, access, authorization, right? How do you address that?
Yeah. So back to this, right? Like earlier I said, we try to separate out the systems, the corporate and our SaaS as much as possible. But there is one place which was advantageous for us to use the same system. So we integrated with the enterprise IDP. And the reason for that is whenever somebody is terminated or changing the role, we can propagate that quickly onto our side. And that's one place there was a tie-in between our SaaS kind of environment and our enterprise environment. Okay. The other thing is all about, like I said, it's all about what roles are, what your responsibilities are, right? Make sure, sorry about that.
No, it's not you.
Yeah, make sure you define your access control. Don't give anything more than what's necessary. So you have to define your roles properly and make sure you spend some time on telling exactly what access each role is going to have. Don't give anything more than necessary, okay? And the third one, which we do, is like, okay, nobody gets a right access to modify the system. By default, everybody, no matter what their security role or how high in their hierarchy it is, they don't have read-write access. You want to go and modify the resource, follow the change control process.
Yeah,
you need to go
even as a CISO, any destructive or constructive action, even simple as, hey, I just need to deploy a small VM to test something. Nope, have to follow the process, right? And so, by the way, who knows what this is? YubiKey, right? So, MFA, multi-factor authentication. So there are multiple ways to protect using MFA. The best way to protect, as our recommendation, and in fact, the FedRAMP High mandate, one of the mandates is to have a hardware-based FIPS 140-2 certified MFA key, which is what we use for any person who has any kind of elevated rights, like myself, like Karunakar. So another thing that you can put in your back pocket to further secure and something you have, kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah. And like no matter what you're doing, you still want to do regular user access review. Make sure there are no leakage or of access where you are getting more access than necessary. So regular user access review is something that we do.
For example, up until November of last year, I was running the SRE and DevSecOps team kind of as a whole, right? Then because the service became so large, I was asked to take on the CISO role. As soon as I moved to the CISO role, a bunch of my access was completely removed. I can't even get that access, right? That's just part, regardless of whether I'm the CEO, CISO, whatever, you have to implement proper access controls.
Yeah, just like any other threat monitoring, you have to also do your anomalous user activity monitoring. So that's one of the things that we did. Okay.
Yep. And of course, audit control, right? Anything anyone is doing, you got to monitor and alert on it. So one of the most critical parts after this is data plane, your data flow and where your data resides.
Yeah. So obviously, by now everybody knows you need to have encryption at rest. And
hopefully everybody knows.
Okay. Yeah. But what I think is even more critical in a SaaS multi-tenant environment is how do you cryptographically separate different tenants? Okay. So because most of the time you are sharing the underlying storage with many customers. So if something happened to one customer, I don't want that to propagate to other customers. So you need a cryptographic separation. And so that's where it's not like depending on the cloud provider for everything all the time. It's all about also changing a product. How do I make sure I take advantage of it? If I have really sensitive information, can I do encryption at an application layer? Was there a question? No. Okay, thanks.
I mean, something as simple as, you guys use iPhones and Google Photos, iCloud, whatever, right? What if you were able to see someone else's photos? Something as simple as that. That is a perfect example of a secure multi-tenant environment. right? Forget about enterprise.
Yeah. So, and again, like you want authorization workflow. Anytime you want to delete data, have a workflow on who is going to approve to delete the data, right? Most of our data deletion happens within our product, but if you have to manually delete it, there should be a process on why you're doing it, and you need to have an authorization workflow.
And finally, data sanitization process. So yes, you need to have controls of how the data gets deleted, and data could be anything, metadata, data, PII data, whatever, right? But you also need to make sure that the data is actually deleted, right? So crypto wipe the data, that it cannot be recovered regardless of the attempt. So if you remove the cryptographic key, the data can't be recovered regardless. Make sense? Very important. Some regulatory bodies actually mandate that, GDPR, FedRAMP, so on and so forth, right? So extremely critical that you have a data sanitization strategy in a SaaS world, right? Yeah. Any questions, by the way?
If you're going to talk about it later, so how about key management?
Yep.
Any tips about, I mean, that definitely is where you can have the cloud provider do it, you can do it, you can have a third party do it. You got any tips around that?
Yes, go ahead.
Let me take it, right? Like, like I said, we are a SaaS provider. Just like we are taking advantage where we tell, okay, we need to manage the keys for our data. So it's 3 levels, right? You want to do the same thing for your customers, okay?
So default, the question is recommendation on key management strategy.
By default, right? Like
Consideration.
Yeah, means like you need to design your product in such a way. You can have different ways to configure it. Like some customers are very risk averse, okay? They tell, I want to hold the keys. So you need to design your product where you can integrate your product with an external key management and give the control to the customer, okay? But there are a lot of customers who told, okay, no, because if I lose my keys, I lose my data. I want you to do it, right? So, but then when you are doing it, you need to give them an assurance that nobody has access to your data, even like unless there is troubleshooting or anything. So our strategy overall is, by default, we do the key management. But if you are a risk-averse customer who wants it, our product is designed in such a way you can offload the key management and control back to the customer. And I think that's exactly what the cloud providers are doing, okay? Oh, by default, you have a provider managed keys. But if you don't want that, you can have your own keys, you can control it. The risk with it is like data loss. You lose your keys, you are losing
At that point, you are not virtually air gapping your data. Because if a threat act, and I've had this conversation with a bunch of CISOs, right? A federal provider, right? We are gonna, our standard is to own our own KMS. Great, no problem at all, we support it. Have you considered the risk that if a threat actor gets in, either destroyed your KMS completely, your key management system completely, or gets access to your KMS, it's game over. Of course, we have controls on our side, but now you're further sharing the secure shared responsibility model. So if the KMS gets destroyed, you cannot read your data. We cannot help you. It's game over.
Yeah.
So then they were, we didn't even consider that risk.
Yeah.
Right? So it's extremely important. Now, further to it, there are different KMS tools out there, different services out there. To his point, now, like for us, we've actually distributed different keys, passphrases, certificates, passwords in different places. We use a key vault system, a KMS system. We use encrypted databases that are part and parcel of the product, right? So a threat actor can't actually get access to a customer's data in a readable format just because they have the keys. They have to infiltrate the product. They have to infiltrate the multiple databases that we have deployed. So that's one of our recommendations, is to spread out the keys to the kingdoms in a way where if someone is able to exploit one of the databases, they still can't read it. If they exploit the KMS, they can't read it.
Yeah, means like, but as a recommendation, if you're a SaaS provider, you need to provide multiple options for a customer. And if you're a SaaS consumer, except for really, really sensitive thing, just offload the keys to the provider.
Yeah.
Okay.
And back up your keys, back up your key management system. Because if you lose it,
okay.
Anyway, so
let's move on. Okay.
Yeah. So,
like we spoke about identity and governance, we spoke about network, and we spoke about data protection. And then you have to make sure you are monitoring for threats across all of these things, okay? So you need to have a pretty good threat and vulnerability management program. And again, like I said, the theme is, in our case, we went with a security as a service. So we take advantage of the cloud native tools where they do threat detection at different layers, whether it's at a virtual machine layer or at a PaaS layer or a data layer. So we take advantage of it. But there is an end-to-end coverage. Just don't focus on like, oh, compute is where my threats are, or data is where my threats are. You also have PaaS services which can be attacked. So you need to incorporate everything and make sure you are monitoring threat across the entire landscape and not on one thing.
And spend time on vulnerability tools and services. Not all of them are created equal.
Yeah.
We use a continuous vulnerability management tool, right? Others use once a week, kind of thing. By the time you get to that actual alert, it's 2 weeks, right? So,
So, and again, detection is good, but you want to be a little bit ahead. Have deception technologies where you have things where people are trying to attack and you are getting attacked. So you can be ready for the real attacks. Okay?
That's right. Yeah, here's an example of, based on the NIST model, NIST 800-53 model of a vulnerability management, table. So that's in there. I'll share, we have the slides. But here's the bottom line. You are going to get attacked, but are you ready for it, right? So Karunakar talked about detection is good, but deception is better. Why is that? Well, if you know you're going to get attacked, you need to employ all strategies that you have at your disposal to slow them down in getting access to the actual data, crown jewels, right? Deception is one of the best ways that I've found, and it's very effective because they think that they're attacking production environment, but they're not. They're being deceived into thinking that, and your security team is actually getting some critical time back so they can investigate and shut them down, right? So detection is good, but deception is better because it buys your security team more time. This is true for on-prem services, cloud services, whatever, okay? Why is that? Well, that's because attackers are becoming more and more sophisticated, right? Now they're exfiltrating the data, leaking the data, they're destroying the data, they're destroying the backup infrastructure, right? So you need to become more sophisticated with them. So detect early, all the way at the perimeter, and deceive them into thinking that they are attacking real infrastructure, but they're not. Buy your team time with all the right tools and services and process in place. So, and use an incident response and recovery framework. We use the NIST framework. That works for us, but you got to have a framework in mind, right? And then finally, in summary.
Yeah. So in summary, whose responsibility is security? Security is everyone's responsibility. Yours, your customer, underlying cloud provider. And then you need to know what your resources are. Inventorying of your resources is very, very key. Discover everything. Make sure you have the right level of controls and protection for those things. And it's all about empowerment of your team. At the end of the day, it's not a one-person job. Your team should be empowered. How are they empowered? You need to have well-defined roles and responsibilities for your team members, okay? You need to make sure you are ready for things which are going to happen. Do tabletop exercises, right? Often. Do real kind of incident response activities, okay? Whether it's a BCDR testing or like a ransomware testing, whatever it is, right?
Threat hunting, all those things.
Yeah, just make sure your team is ready. So conducting this kind of actual security tests and incident response tests, tabletop exercises are all really, really important.
And by the way, process is king. Everything that he talked about, process is king. If you don't have your processes documented, whether it's tabletop exercises, actual event incident responses, DR exercises, if you don't have your process implemented and a RACI in place on who's responsible for what, you are going to fail. So process is king. We talked about virtual air gap, completely virtual air gap, secluded environment where you should have copies of your critical data and metadata. I talked about key vault, right? Those kinds of things, extremely important. And finally, nobody wants to call their baby ugly, so guess what? You have someone else do it. right? Have a third-party assessor. It's extremely critical. Have them validate your security controls and find gaps, and there will be gaps. Don't be egoistic about it. Report those gaps, come up with a mitigation plan, and fix those gaps. Very, very important that you have all of these things that we talked about implemented and discussed openly. Anything to add?
No, again, have a third-party assessment. That's how you validate what you're doing is right, wrong. Again, validate against a well-defined framework.
That's right. Any questions? We have some links here for a bunch of things that we talked about. We have a security white paper. So any questions that you guys have before we leave?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned multiple times having a copy of the data, backup copy. So what are you doing with privacy requirement for GDPR when customers want to be forgotten? How are you simplifying that process for those customers removing their data from the active system all the way to the backups?
Yep. Yeah, good question. So we actually, from our...
what's the question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The question is, how do you tackle privacy for things like GDPR where people have the right to be forgotten in Europe, right? So if you have a secondary copy of your data elsewhere, how are we satisfying their requirement? Great question. So we actually give that power to the customer. Now for us, we are a backup as a service platform, so the customer has the ability to take the action to delete the data themselves. We don't do it for them. Any metadata that we have for the customer, like admin's email address, phone numbers, that's also considered privacy data, PII data. So we, again, same thing. They all they have to do, again, process, right? Some things you can satisfy with product, tech. Other things you have to satisfy with the process. They open up a support ticket with us. They tell us what data they want us to delete. And then we have an automated process that goes out and discovers the appropriate data regarding that particular individual, and it's deleted.
Yeah, means just to add to it, the product is built with privacy in place in mind. So whenever we are storing the data, we give the customer an option. Oh, you are in this particular geography. Where do you want to store your data? And means on the back end, we store it. And that's where the third-party assessors come in and tell, okay, yes, you're storing here and you're not leaking your data outside of your geography. The key thing is your product has to be designed with privacy in mind. Okay?
Yep. Yeah. Good question. Other questions? I know this is a very meaty topic, hopefully requires more than 45 minutes. We are available on LinkedIn or whatever. Please connect with us. Happy to continue this conversation at a later time. Okay. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, this one.
Yes, sir.
Touch briefly on IAM. If you could list some of the challenges you face, which is choosing which sources of data and roles and responsibilities that you're pulling from, how you were able to get those integrated, and leveraging that and stuff like MFA and whatnot. Just essentially, what would you say are the top considerations to consider when rolling out AIM into an organization that
Got it.
is typical Active Directory and isn't as integrated as it should be?
So the question is, what are the top considerations on implementing an appropriate end-to-end access authentication authorization program in place to satisfy the needs of the business overall? If I was to regurgitate, right? IAM tools, AD, and other tools, right?
Yeah.
You want to tackle that?
Means first thing, your identity provider, right? Who's your identity provider, right? Where do you want to go? Do you want to use your corporate identity provider, or you want to use your own identity provider? If you do that, how are you managing?
So something like an Okta or whatever, right?
Yeah. And how are you managing your users when they are terminated, when they're changing job roles? So you need to have a workflow which can change their access level, an automated workflow whenever their role changes or they are terminating. That's number one. The second thing is you need to have, you have to monitor your activity of your users, right? User activity monitoring. So what are they doing? Are they doing things which are beyond what they're supposed to do? For example, you might have given them only a role for a specific thing, but are they trying to access something else, okay? Even though it doesn't permit. So looking at your error logs and monitoring for any kind of access violations is important, okay? And then like I said, user access review, identity governance is about user access review. Continuously go and review your user roles, what they are, have a program in place where you can go and monitor. MFA definitely helps when there is a breach in your identity. That's the extra level of protection. But like, it's all about your legitimate users. What are they doing? Are they monitoring? If they change the roles, are your access levels automatically adjusted, or what is the process? Those are the things you need to take care of.
So it goes back to the 3 Ps, right? People, process, and products, right? You hire a new person, they need access. Step 1. What do they need access to? Why do they need access? That's all process. Now you can automate the process, right, using tools and services, right? And you can use the tool and services to manage access, IAM, right? Including authorization, right, and authentication. There are multiple tools and services for that, right? And then revocation of access in the back end. So you document the process right from up front, okay? New hire, change in role, coming in or going out, right? And termination, that's all process. You can enable the process with different types of tools and services. There are tons of tools out there that can do that for you. Don't try to homegrown. It is my recommendation, right? And then managing access, MFA, tools like Okta, SS, single sign-on, those kinds of things, right? But you have to make an assessment based on your requirements. And then how do you actually manage authorization to the role specifically? As the CISO, I should be able to elevate my role to something privileged, right? So how do you manage that? There are tons of tools out there that allow that. So Azure PIM, for example, Privileged Identity Management, great tool for that. Hey, okay, Syed is a CISO. He's the owner of this tenant in Azure and these 10 subscriptions. He has full access. However, when he logs in, he doesn't have any access. He can request that access. So there are multiple tools and services at each of those layers, horizontal layers, right? People, process, and products that you can employ and implement. But process documentation is where you would start, and then find the tools. Don't try to, here's a tool, I want to use this tool, because that sometimes works, but most of the time it doesn't work. Yeah. Document the process, then align it with the different tools and services based on your unique requirements.
Yeah. It's like I will put active monitoring of user behavior.
That's right.
It's pretty critical. And that's how you can go and find it.
Yeah, that's how they keep me in check. Yeah. Good question. Anything else, guys? Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.